So my name is Deirdre Hinksman. I'm the marketing manager here at SmartBear Software for a product called Alertsite, which we'll talk a bit more about later on. And I have Dennis and John with me. So do you guys want to reintroduce yourselves, give a little quick blurb about who you are?
I'm Dennis Goodwin. I am still, as far as I know, the product owner for the Alertsite product line here at SmartBear.
John Lacania, team lead sales engineers. I'm covering the Alertsite product.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, guys. And thanks for bearing with us through this. But so we'll get started with Shift Left, the art of continuous monitoring. So today we're going to go over the software development lifecycle, what that looks like, and then go through how monitoring and testing can work together. And then we'll explore how you can use monitoring left of your production. So how can you incorporate it into other phases of the lifecycle in a way that will benefit your business? And then we'll open up the floor for questions with Dennis and John. So as I'm sure you guys are, most of you guys are familiar with this, but this is the software development lifecycle. So the goal throughout the entire lifecycle really is to maximize speed, quality, and cost, or not maximize cost, but be as efficient as possible with your cost. And so as you know, it's more of an iterative process, right? Like you go through a planning, design, development, test, deployment, and then you maintain the product that you have and loop in feedback throughout that whole process. So typically we talk about monitoring towards the end of the life cycle, so maintaining and deploying, but today we're going to be exploring how you can incorporate it into other phases of the software development life cycle. So real quick, we're going to go bust some myths. So here are some phrases that you hear kind of often, right? Like shift left only applies to testing. Testing and monitoring have to happen sequentially. Monitoring is for testing. Synthetic monitoring can help identify issues in a test environment, and monitoring is only for ops teams. And now, find out what's real and what's fake. Oh no. Okay, so shift left only applies to monitoring or to testing. Myth. And testing and monitoring only happen sequentially. Also a myth. These can happen simultaneously, and we'll go over how that's possible today. And then monitoring is for testing. Fact, another thing that we'll go over today. Synthetic monitoring can help identify issues in the test environment. Another fact, which also we'll be exploring today. And then monitoring is for ops teams. That is true, but it is not only for ops teams, which is what that statement says. So because of that, this is a myth.
A trick fact.
And if anybody wants the video of us myth busting those various statements, we have that available.
Yep, we'll send this video to you after we record it. So this is the software development lifecycle again, but it's highlighting the areas that you can incorporate monitoring into as a strategy to benefit your entire software development lifecycle. And so, as we mentioned before, shift left refers to a practice for software development that focuses on quality. Really, the goal is to move towards prevention rather than detection, to start testing earlier than they ever have, and really to increase the quality, better the quality, shorten the test cycles, and obviously reduce the possibility of having unpleasant surprises toward the end of the development cycle. And so, Dennis, I'll hand it over to you if you want to go ahead and explore why monitoring is important.
Sure. So, all the things that Saoirse just said about the benefits of shift left in terms of, prevention and, avoiding surprises holds true when we talk about shifting monitoring left. So even though the term shift left is often applied to the testing world, it's equally kind of applicable here. So there's three major areas where we see benefits if we start monitoring earlier in the software lifecycle. From a performance standpoint, and we're talking about performance, we mean the performance of your applications. By consistently monitoring your applications in pre-production environments, you get a view of performance from an ongoing perspective. And so this gives you sort of an EKG, if you will, a heartbeat of how your apps are performing as you're deploying new versions of your code. to various environments. So it's giving you, real-time validation that you're doing no harm, or that you are doing harm. But either way, earlier in the process than when you do your production deployment. So that's sort of the first benefit, is catching those things early. Another big benefit is ensuring monitoring continuity, and what I mean by that is when you monitor your pre-production environments, you're not only monitoring the applications themselves, but you're effectively ensuring that your monitors are going to work. So when you implement a change to an application, the change itself may be working perfectly fine. It may perform well. It may be functionally correct, but it may be different. And it may be different in such a way that it breaks your monitor. We have heard frequently from customers the impact when this happens, when that first monitor that hits is a production monitor, and there's nothing monitoring the earlier environments. So what happens there is you deploy to production, and then all your monitors fail. Everything goes into alert mode, phones start ringing and buzzing and falling off side tables, and everyone's scrambling around, and there's no more monitoring coverage of that application as well. So the way to avoid that is to monitor before you go to production, and ensure that those monitors will continue to work. If you break a monitor in a test environment, that's much less of a problem. It's easily rectified, and you can then move those updated monitors forward with the rest of the code. So monitoring continuity is a big benefit to shifting your monitoring left. And then the last category of benefit that we see by monitoring pre-production is you're actually monitoring the environments that you have. And you get a couple of benefits out of this. For one thing, you have immediate visibility into the health of your test environments, whether they're up or down. That helps you ensure that you can get them up and keep them up, and your testing can continue unaffected. The other benefit you get when you're monitoring your test environments is that you're constantly driving traffic through those environments, and oftentimes pre-production environments have very low volume or very sporadic volume. And so by doing this, you're keeping those application infrastructures primed and ready to go when an actual tester comes in and tries to do something. And John, you had a really good point on this topic
Sure.
this morning. Why don't you share it with the second group here?
Testing environments and development environments, by their very nature, are very quiet. There's very little traffic on them. So it's very hard to use some of these fantastic APM tools, basically instrumenting your applications, because there's no traffic to take a look at anything. So what will happen is with synthetic monitoring is we'll create the traffic where there was no traffic, a constant flow of traffic to leverage across those other tools that you have in place.
Yep. And that concept of the EKG applies in those app instrumentation tools as well.
Yeah, exactly.
You not only have more traffic on that current build, but you have the view of the of those particular calls and methods over time as well.
That's right, because the only other traffic that would be without synthetic traffic would be the manual tester or the automated test, or maybe even some load test taking place. But at some point, that will die down, and there'll be no traffic at all.
Exactly. So that's a good point that John brought up this morning that I hadn't specifically called out. So that's a good one. All right. So given that there are benefits to monitoring in those pre-production environments, what we find here is that it's a very complementary situation. That the testing obviously lets you know things are working the way you expect them to work. When you're doing load, capacity, performance testing, obviously those kind of tests are single point in time, but they will provide a lot of value for that single point in time. And then obviously anything you catch from a defect standpoint is critical, right? That's really the main reason you're testing. What monitoring does is it just layers on top of that and gives you that view over time of the performance of the application. It lets you know that those key user journeys are working, even if they're not specifically the test cases that are being executed for a given software deployment. You'll be able to kind of see how that looks. And you don't necessarily have to have specific test cases around those important user journeys if you're not doing code work in those areas. So taken together, it's giving you a much more complete view of that application as you move it through the cycle.
And I think an important thing to note as well too is like, if you're trying to achieve a true DevOps culture, you really need them to work together, right? It's not necessarily just one or the other. It's how can you make it so that each department is working collaboratively, and everything that they're doing is benefiting one another rather than being siloed and kind of not being blind to what's happening besides what's in your specific department.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. It does bring together groups that typically are separate, right? There's a handoff at the end of one process onto another, and there's not a lot of awareness of what's gone on in between. And so that can be a little jarring too, but it does facilitate collaboration between those teams, and I think it makes the monitoring better at the end. And at the same time, that monitoring happening sooner helps with the app development as well. All right. So just to give you a quick level set of what Alertsite is, all about. So just to step back here. So we're talking about synthetic monitoring. So this Alertsite is a synthetic monitoring platform that allows you to monitor your web applications, your APIs from around the world. We surface up performance, availability, and functional correctness results in a console that users can view. We will send out reports and alerts, scheduled reports, as they happen, and alerts as they're triggered. So that is.
I just want to point out with the alerts to make everybody feel comfortable. In the testing environment, you have a way of muting the alerts. So if you don't want to have the alerts on in the testing environment and just look at those reports, look at the charts, you certainly can do that as well.
Yes, our alerting has a lot of controls. So you can set it to very high thresholds before you get alerted, who gets alerted, how they get alerted, when they get alerted, can all be controlled. So yes, you don't have to be too concerned about, flying off a huge amount of alerts to folks who aren't used to dealing with that kind of production-centric type thing. But Alertsite as a platform does all those things. And as we move it left, we take advantage of these capabilities, and we can actually, can you go 2 slides up? I want to skip. Yeah, we'll come back to that one in a second.
Okay.
Yeah. So as we move left, we take this concept of the monitoring as depicted by the ops team looking at the console on the right side. As we come left, there's 2 main parts to this. You're in the design and build process is where you can either create the monitors you're creating the monitors no matter what, but you can create the monitors from existing assets. So for example, in the case of APIs, if you're using SOAP UI to create test cases for your applications, those test cases can be used to create monitors very easily. And so in a very simple reuse step, you can take that same test case, make a monitor out of it, and you are essentially monitoring from the first environment going forward. So whether that's a dev environment, a test environment, or a staging environment, that test case can move on with the code and live with it. The other kind of creation scenario that we're seeing become a lot more popular is the case where monitors are created automatically as part of the build process. So with our REST APIs, users are able to automatically create and deploy monitors in conjunction with their code deployments. And we expect that this is going to become a much bigger deal over time as more automation starts to seep into the process at more companies. And so we're going to continue to improve this process and make sure that you have the ability to, as much as possible, make the monitor creation and the monitor editing be part of the build process right from the beginning. And so as those monitors get created and move through the cycle, now we've effectively monitored left, if you will. And all of the benefits that the Alertsite platform has are available throughout that life cycle. And to John's point, you can tailor who gets what along the way. And different groups are certainly going to be involved as you move from the initial builds through the QA process and then onto, a staging and then production environment.
So Dennis, use a particular example of a SOAP-UI test case, taking that testing artifact and creating a monitor out of it. And for all intents and purposes, you're literally using the same literal test case. You're not really modifying them at all. But are there other examples of test cases that we could leverage and reuse across the Alertsite application, maybe at the UI layer?
Well, sure. I mean, you can, if you're using Selenium, for example, to monitor web applications, those Selenium scripts can be, reused and brought forward to the different environments.
That's fantastic.
I think there's something to be said too for reusing, the designs that your teams have specifically created versus like trying to recreate something from scratch, and then you might miss something, or it obviously will take you longer. So with that, I think there's a key point that you are driving consistency throughout your company. It's not necessarily like, oh, your development team uses this and then your monitoring team starts over and uses this. It's like you're using the same artifact from design all the way through to operations. So there's something that puts everybody on the same page. You're aware of the same metrics. You have the same insights and the same ability to act quickly on anything that changes.
Yeah, another aspect of that is another trend that we heard a lot about talking with customers in the fall was that even if the monitoring hasn't shifted left, the creation of the monitor has. And we're seeing more and more that the ops teams are working with folks, upstream to create the monitors themselves, whether they're web monitors in DesiaClick or SOAP-UI. They're expecting to have the SOAP-UI test cases come forward to production from somewhere else in the organization. It's sort of the beginning of monitor left, in my opinion, is that you get the exposure to what the monitors are, and you're helping create them and reuse those assets going forward, but they're not necessarily monitoring in that pre-production environment yet. And it's a logical extension of that trend, is that we'll see more monitoring happening.
By reusing that asset forward, right, taking it from a different group and moving into operations, in many ways, that asset was already paid for. So there's an ROI there. There's an ROI story to reuse those assets for your business, because the ops team doesn't have to go out and create their own monitoring artifacts at this point.
Yeah, and you're also ensuring that what's being monitored is truly what's important to those teams. Well, then it goes, because the ops guys don't always know what they should be monitoring.
That's right.
They might be told to do something, but
so the definition of success for testing is the same definition of success for monitoring, and that would only make sense. Why would you have a different definition of success for monitoring than you do for testing? Functionally correct applications should be done in the testing phase as well as the monitoring phase, the operations phase.
And and the ops guys are not always the best people to determine what the steps of that journey should be.
Well, they just don't have the time.
Right. So yeah, there's a lot of value in reuse, and that only amplifies the benefit of actually doing the monitoring as well earlier in the process.
Sure.
So. All right, can we go? I want to take a little bit of a side trip into kind of locations. If we can go back to the hybrid deployment slide. So I talked about being able to monitor from anywhere in the globe in the earlier picture, talking about the Alertsite platform. And we have a global network of nodes, and we can run our web and API monitors from anywhere where those nodes exist throughout the globe. But we also have the ability to deploy monitoring capabilities inside customers' infrastructures, and that manifests itself in the form of a server, which it can either be physical or virtual. You can deploy that server anywhere in your infrastructure where you have the appropriate server components, whether that's VMware, Hyper-V. You could have an Azure instance of Hyper-V in the cloud, or you can also deploy to Amazon via an API or AMI. So you can get that server anywhere that you have server assets in your organization. Sometimes you don't have, that server infrastructure to play with. We have also a private node endpoint, which allows you to put a lightweight agent onto any machine in your infrastructure. So if the testing's happening somewhere that doesn't have a server infrastructure, you can get that, that private node where you want it to be.
So
go ahead.
what kind of places would that be, Dennis, that wouldn't have a server infrastructure?
You might have a remote office where you've got QA folks working. In a broader sense, you might also have companies with many locations. Could be retail stores. It could be corporate campuses. Lots of places now don't need server infrastructure to set up shop because everything's on the internet. So ensuring that performance is good, that the application is available from a given location is critical, and the need to have a server is really optional at this point. So you can get the monitor wherever you need it to run, whether that's for testing environments or production. And the use cases around the hybrid deployment, it really started out giving us the ability to monitor applications that weren't public facing. And whether that's a production app or a pre-production environment, doesn't really matter. If a customer wanted to monitor something that wasn't publicly facing, we had a solution to drop that server in. What we also find now is that we see interest in hitting, endpoints that aren't publicly facing that support a public application. So a lot of times the API calls, for example, that an application might use aren't publicly facing, even though the website is. So you can hit those underlying infrastructure components from a private server. And then, obviously we talked about the pre-production environments. If they're not public facing, that's a great use case to put the private node in. And then that last case we just talked about is more the location-centric part. It's not so much about whether the application itself is publicly facing or not. It has to do more with how is my location doing, and whether or not the location is accessing public or private applications or endpoints doesn't really matter. It's the performance of the location that becomes the important dimension, and the ability to look at it from that lens is equally important. And that value, I think, is there for both production monitoring as well as pre-production. You want to know that if a location is having a very slow day, for example, you don't want to attribute that slowness to the application being tested. It's good to know that the location as a whole is either in good shape or not good shape, and that you don't attribute that solely to the application you're looking at. So there's a lot of value in putting that monitoring in at the location itself. Anything else, John, on?
No, that's good.
All right. Excellent.
All right, John, do you want to steal the presenter for me?
Yeah, sure.
Show everybody how it's done.
So let's, we're going to take a look at how this monitoring of various environments for a given set of applications might look in Alertsite.
So fantastic. Thanks for the handoff. So what we're looking at here is the Alertsite SaaS platform, a tool that allows you to understand the availability, performance, and functional correctness of web applications and APIs over time. And I'm sitting here in the home screen of my dashboard. And what I have done ahead of time within my demo account, which consists of 50 monitors, is I created a view taking advantage of the ability to just kind of narrow down the monitors I'm looking at to monitors that are focused on our SDLC process here in Flow. So what I have here are two different artifacts I want you to think about. We have the individual monitors testing applications 1 through 5 across 3 different environments: dev, prod, and test. And we also have the dimension of a data center, being our New Amsterdam data center, just taking advantage of a naming convention. I only have one data center, so that's all you're going to see is New Amsterdam. The top 3 are not actually monitors. The top 3, dev environment, prod environment, test environment, are actually groups of monitors Because there'll be cases where you want to see how the monitors perform as a group and individually. So I've put my test, prod, and dev monitors into the various groups, and then I leverage the AppDex score, where one implies the applications are performing to your expectation. And I purposely set very aggressive SLAs, so we moved away from one that our applications are degrading and they're not performing very well. And we'll certainly touch on that. Now, there were a couple examples, Dennis, you walked us through of why to monitor non-production environments. One of them could be the testing environment itself may be failing. And that could be databases, it could be the hardware, it could be app servers, it could be some other layer in the infrastructure. So we made a change late yesterday, I'd probably say around 5, 6 p.m., to our testing environment for app number 3. And lo and behold, down came the application. So what happened here? Well, why don't we go find out? Because app 3 for prod is working just fine. So why don't we see what happened here? And there's app 3 for prod, 100% availability. But here in the test environment, it's not working out so well. These are hourly segments. Let's jump in here. Bring up our quick panel. And I'm firing off these tests from various locations. In this case here, it's failing from Birmingham, but I can navigate through any of the various runs here. And here's Dublin, Ireland. And we have that international theme. That wasn't intentional. But it fails on the third action, the action being the page refresh. And we could see with our camera icon what we're expecting and what we got back. Now, we rolled this out a couple of weeks ago. We have the successful capture. This is what we want to see. That's when I click the logout button. I want to be returned back to login page. But what we don't get is the login page. When I click logout, I get a status 500 from the app server. It's not going so well here, Dennis.
No.
Right? But that's so we now could see before and after, and you immediately know what the problem is. So our testing environment is not doing so well right now for this application.
No, and just with these results, it's also it's pretty instantaneous to see if it, for example, the application has changed in such a way that the monitor can't work.
Exactly.
That would be a very different look, both in the status codes that are returned by Alertsite and in the screen capture prepare.
Now, our monitoring rules hold true whether it's production or pre-production. Basically, let's focus on outages, not a single point in time. So while we'll collect a single failure, we say to ourselves, can this be duplicated? Is this something that spans time, this state? So we fire off another test 6 to 10 seconds later, and we get the same result here. If it was successful, just declare it a warning. We're not going to interact with your team, creating extra noise. But now we know it's failed back to back in a really short time frame. Again, 6 to 10 seconds, letting you know this spans time.
And of course, it's been down for almost 24 hours now, John. So your infrastructure folks probably need to get on this one, huh?
That's right. That's what happens when stuff happens overnight. And if we set up our alerts, we certainly could jump right on this. Now, what happens if our app guy says, look, we had a maintenance window. This doesn't matter. You guys are just creating a lot of unnecessary noise. Well, we could create a blackout window here. So I could black it out from this so-called maintenance window that he's claiming he had. So we don't go into failure here.
That'd be a long maintenance window in this case, John.
Oh, without a doubt.
But in general, yeah. But the nice thing, that brings up a good point, though. You can set different thresholds for alerting, for blackouts, expected availability, performance, given some environments in pre-production are sometimes just generally slower. All of those things can be set for each monitor in each environment. Even the recipients of the alerts can be different depending on which environment that application is hitting. So all of that can be tweaked to be appropriate to the environment that you're looking at. So you don't create unnecessary noise, but you do get the right info to the right folks.
Sure. Now, as we know, this particular monitor we've created is firing off from different international cities, but there's a use case that you shared with us earlier about maybe some of these environments aren't customer facing, right? What do we do? Well, that's the same scenario for our development environment. It's not customer facing. So what I've done is I've deployed a private node called Krypton. So we're not all confused that it's a real city out there. and that's running on VMware. And that's our private location we're creating the synthetic traffic from.
Yeah, so we don't care on one sense where they run from.
That's right.
The same capabilities exist, and that's the beauty of the hybrid deployment model, is you can get the monitoring to occur from wherever it's appropriate, but the rest of the platform is the same.
Exactly. Now, let's say your developer tapped you on the shoulder with a hardware infrastructure team, and he says, "Oh, I got this. We just fixed it." Well, you could always test it out right here in the interface, test on demand, and it fires it off right now. Goes through that process. I'm going through actually right now to hit the Amsterdam production one, and I'll go through that.
Now, of course, if you're monitoring on a regular schedule, you don't even have to do this step, though. As soon as that environment is fixed, the next monitoring run that comes through on the schedule is going to pick it up.
Correct.
And it's going to clear the alert. So anyone watching the console will be able to see it clear. Anyone getting alerts is going to get a clear alert on that. And everyone's going to know without any additional steps being taken. So that's another one of those advantages of taking advantage of what typically have been production monitoring attributes and getting those benefits in the pre-production environments.
Sure. So let's take a look at the groups. And let's take a look at one of the groups that isn't doing so well, and that's our testing environment. So the testing environment consists of 5 monitors, app 1 through 5, and there's our failing monitor. And we can see the AppDex score over time, and then it improved. Why did it improve? Well, it improved because I adjusted the SLA values, the expected values that this application should meet over time. I made it less aggressive, so the AppDex score eventually turned positive. And then we also could see the application performing poorly as well. If we just turn on our failing monitor, app 3, then we could see app 3 just failing right here.
Yep.
Pulling down the AppDex score until I adjust the SLA values.
Right. And just, real quick aside on AppDex for those who don't know what it is. It's essentially a metric that allows you to look at both the performance versus a threshold and the success or fail of a run. And by looking at all that together, you can aggregate composite for either a single monitor or multiple monitors. And it's a nice metric because it allows you to get those attributes of both performance and availability in one view. So you can see and with a group, it's especially valuable because you can see at a glance how that entire group is doing, and then drill in and see which components are affecting it the most.
Sure. It looks like we have a question here. Is there any way to take this information and share it with other team members that may not have access to the Alertsite console?
Sure. So we've, I think, alluded to a few of those things already. You have the alerts, which is a way to push out information about the monitors to anybody. They don't need to be Alertsite users. You can send it to any user via email or SMS. You can send it via webhooks to any notification system that's out there and consume it. We have some native integrations with folks like PagerDuty as well, but you can send to everybody in that Knox stack that you would typically use, whether it's ServiceNow or VictorOps, Xmatters, any of those folks.
Sure.
So alerts are one way. We have the ability to send out reports. So if you want to send out on a daily basis, ongoing reports about the performance of your apps, those can all be sent out and delivered. Again, those can be delivered to anybody. They don't need to be Alertsite users. And that's an example of a high level summary report that can go out. So if you got this every day, you'd know exactly how things were going, and without having to go in or create users in Alertsite. And then the other way to do it is we have the ability to take these tiles, which is a different view of the dashboard that John showed prior. We can take these tiles and we can share them. And so you can share a tile. That link can be embedded anywhere. You can create a web page. You can create your own dashboard if you wanted to, really, of these tiles. But these tiles can be shared and they can be viewed by anybody publicly. There's no way to get deeper behind this to get to any potentially sensitive data. It's just a high-level summary view, and this is a live tile. This will update every minute.
And you don't have to log in.
Nope. So once you give this out, folks can have a real bird's eye view of what's going on in that for that app in whatever environment it is in real time.
And of course, you could revoke the tile access.
You can, yes. Those shares can be unshared.
That's fantastic.
So yeah. So there's a lot of ways to get the data, or even forget the data. There's a lot of ways to get the information out of the system and into in front of folks who need it. And then the last sharing kind of mechanism is you can actually ingest the data from the platform directly through REST API. So if for example you were pulling in results or data from other systems that you might have in place, whether you're looking at logs or APM data, you can pull the Alertsite data in and kind of correlate it with other data you have for a given environment and application. So.
Sounds good, Dennis.
Yep.
All right, so I'm going to hand it back to you.
All right. This also brings up a good point about integration. So I know Alertsite integrates with a variety of different tools, but Dennis, do you want to go over real quickly which ones would be the most beneficial in this scenario?
Well, like I said, we will integrate with the alert and notification vendors in the Knox stack. And we have a variety of ways we can push the data out that can be adjusted into those systems. We can also push out our raw data. And that data can be consumed by systems like Splunk, for example, and kind of put into a data store that will usually feature data from multiple sources that will then kind of correlate what's going on and help to get to root cause and other insights that pull from more than just the synthetic monitoring.
All right.
Okay, so just to wrap it up. The benefits of monitoring, in these pre-production environments, fall into, those buckets we talked about. You get that insight into the performance of the application over time. Regardless of how many deployments are done, we're just going to keep going. We're going to keep looking at it, keep recording it, and you'll know exactly what's happening with your application as every build gets deployed into a given environment. You'll know that your monitors are going to keep working, and that's an important one. You'll not get that midnight surprise on Sunday when the deployment goes out in production. You'll know, well in advance that the monitors will have to be modified to reflect the changes to the application. You're going to get better insights into how your test environments are doing, and this is helpful, I think, too, not just for an immediate problem, but also you'll be able to trend it over time, and you'll be able to see if there's patterns and problems with a particular environment, which will help ensure that your test environments are up and running more efficiently over time. So there's a real benefit to having that ongoing view into multiple environments. And then finally, as automated building, testing, and monitoring becomes much more prevalent, our ability to kick off and edit monitors automatically through our REST APIs is going to become more and more, I think, used throughout our customer base going forward. We're going to see more of this. We're going to be making more changes to our API tier to make them more friendly with these automated approaches.
Awesome. Sounds great. So we'll take it over into questions. I know we have a couple in the chat at the moment. Let me go ahead and grab those. So you had mentioned benchmarking over time. How does that look like? Do we retain data so that people can compare it into past periods, or how does that work?
Yeah, so by default, we keep 90 days of data in the system, so you can kind of look at the longer view of how a given monitor is doing. If you're pulling the data off, whether it's directly through the APIs or via reports, obviously all those reports are yours to keep at that point as well. So you can get a view of what's going on over time in those environments.
And you certainly have the ability to expand the data retention up to 24 months if you so
that's
choose.
True. Awesome. So in terms of SmartBear tools, what other tools can you use that are complementary to Alertsite or that work well with one another?
So as we said, the SOAP UI integration is very tight. We actually use SOAP UI for playback of our API monitors, so we can ingest those test cases from the exported projects, or you can link them, and upload them directly from SOAP UI or API interfaces and run those monitors. Anything you have in Selenium that you're using for test cases, those Selenium monitors so Selenium scripts can be ingested and become monitors in the platform as well.
We got another one that came in. So how does Alertsite compare to Nagios or Zabbix?
So Alertsite, I would, at the simplest level, Alertsite is more of a source of data that can be brought into those broader system management interfaces. So Zabbix will show you the results from lots of different inputs. And generally speaking, Alertsite would be one of those inputs. So they're complementary tools, much like the notification vendors, like a ServiceNow, for example. You may use ServiceNow throughout your company to do a wide variety of things related to notifications and event management. Alertsite feeds into that. So it's kind of a spoke off that hub, if you will. Same thing with Zabbix and Nagios. These other systems that are generally looking more at infrastructure and networking kind of play as complementary views to what's going on. We're really focused on the application experience.
Right. So if we move away from the APIs for a minute, from SOAP UI integration, in regard to how we compare a little more against some of these other tools. Some of these other tools have the ability to make GET requests against URLs. What we're using, we haven't shown you in this particular session, is the ability to use a real browser against the UI within the web browser itself and create a series of actions or a journey through the application through a series of clicks and inputs. So it's not a GET request looking for 200 OK or looking for a specific keyword on a page. It's literally tying together actions that you create as a user through the UI and then playing that back to get those critical metrics that are important to you to understand the performance of the page from the browser's perspective and all the related objects that are being served and the JavaScript being executed, rather than just a base HTML page.
All right, awesome. Thank you, guys. I'll see if any other questions come in as we're going along. But in the meantime, I think you brought up a good point, John, about the fact that it does. Well, first of all, that we use real browsers rather than emulating a browser. I think it gives you a little bit more insight as to what a real user would experience if they tried to access that journey at that exact moment from that place, rather than like, okay, well, this is what a browser would typically do. And so we're going to try and mimic that essentially to see what results we get. But is there, so you had mentioned user journey, that is sequential, right? Like you can take multiple steps. It's not necessarily just hitting one monitor and then, okay, it loaded, we're done.
That's right. It's like if you think about a banking application, what do you do when you go to a banking site? You just don't go to the home page and just call it a day. You go to the banking application, you log in. At that point, you may choose one of your many accounts I hope you all have out there. Look at your balance, smile, and log out. Maybe even transfer some money to one of your children in their account. That's a journey that can consist of anywhere between 4 and 7 steps. And we're going to play those steps back, making those requests against the page, rendering those objects in the browser itself, executing that JavaScript.
Awesome.
Yeah, and just so what you're doing there, I mean, it's not just that you're assessing how well things render in the browser, but you're also getting at those underlying subsystems and making sure that they're all working in the same manner that they're used by the web application itself. So
Right.
it's a very complete way to monitor that app infrastructure as well as the browser rendering and experience.
All right. Well, if anybody else does not have any questions, I'll give you guys 10 minutes back of your day. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I do want to mention we have a beta out for a product called Test Left. And if you're interested in trying that, it's for a part of our testing tools. Feel free to shoot me an email. My email is on the, should be on your invitation. And I'll send you over the link to sign up for that if you want to try it. But otherwise, have a great day and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.